Welcome to Crude Awakenings, a podcast created to bring the industry back to the truth and to the conversations in oil and gas that nobody else likes to talk about. Hosted by Allen Gilmer, one of the founders of Drilling Info, now Enverus, and Cody Davis, CEO of the Oil and Gas Asset Clearinghouse. Our first episode features a foundational voice in independent producing, Scott Anderson of Anderson Oil. The conversation today covers the bedrock of the family oil and gas business, the role of reputation and straight honesty, and why those principles still matter in today's market. This episode is brought to you by the Oil and Gas Asset Clearinghouse. It's time for Crude Awakenings.
Well, welcome everyone to the very first Crude Awakenings podcast, a podcast created to really to bring Allen Gilmer and mostly his friends, a few of mine, and talk about the things in oil and gas that nobody else likes to talk about. And so without further ado, I'll introduce the main person on our podcast, really my person I looked up to the most in this business and admire the most, Allen Gilmer.
Thanks, Cody. Yeah, welcome to Crude Awakenings, our podcast that really is just focused on the truth and the truth in this business, and it's sometimes hard to get at. And I'm really excited that our first guest in this Crude Awakenings podcast is really the person most important to me in terms of being getting into the oil business in the first place. I worked for a major oil company, and I will tell you that you learn a lot at a major oil company, but what you do not learn is how to be an independent producer. And by happenstance, I ran into Scott Anderson at a wedding that our respective wives were friends with this girl, and he was the only person to talk to be honest with you. So it was the oil guy, and through him I met his father, who was a force of nature, and it was really kind of, in my mind, the bedrock of this business, and that was the family oil and gas business. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Scott Anderson of Anderson Oil.
And I'm here, and I'm really disappointed that Cody looks up to you more than he looks up to me. So that makes me feel bad.
Well, that's a coin flip. That's a coin flip.
Now you say.
I have to give the nod to Allen because Allen introduced me to you. So the beginning was Allen introduced me to Scott, and like I said about Allen, Scott's been, when I have an idea, I talk to Allen about it usually first, and he helps make the idea better. And once we have the idea out together, either Allen says or now I just do it. There's an idea that I have in my life and my bit for business and oil and gas in general. And then I go. He says, "Go talk to Scott. Let's see if because Scott's the guy that if it's a good idea and Scott agrees, we know it's a great idea. If Scott doesn't, we usually kill it. And that's the only person I know like that. And I'm extremely thankful for that. And not just because you can filter out the good and bad ideas like you did for Drilling Info in the early days, right? But also because you'll just be brutally honest and truthful. And that's there's no day where Scott Anderson feeds you full of any BS. And that's such a valuable friend to have and person to have in my life. And I know Allen
absolutely
passed that on to me.
Absolutely. Scott was there at the very beginning of when we started our Seismic for Equity. He was there at the very beginning of Drilling Info, and always there with very sage advice that you don't come to easily. And I think it had to do with who Scott was surrounded with as well. So let's start with that, Scott. It's like a family oil and gas business that is, unfortunately becoming a rarer and rarer thing. And, that used to be what this whole business was made of. So tell me, love to hear some of the history of all this.
Well, gentlemen, I don't know how long this podcast is, but I can keep you busy a long time just on the history of Anderson Oil. But I'll try and give you a synopsis. First of all, Anderson Oil was started by my father, Bruce Anderson. He started the company in Casper, Wyoming. Kind of interesting how he got there. My father was the son. Well, basically, my father was a fourth generation oil brat. And he was in Long Beach, California. He had just returned from World War II to help his father out in some business. And he met this girl while he was in Long Beach, and she ended up being a Hollywood actress. And that was my mother, Jacqueline White at the time, now Jacqueline Anderson. So they met each other. They dated 3 weeks and were married in 3 months. So this was after the war. So Shazam. They went on their honeymoon, and when my dad came back from the honeymoon with his wife, of all things, my grandfather got drunk, sold the business, and my dad was unemployed with a, Hollywood wife, and he had to make some decisions on where he was going. So he ended up looking at opportunities, and somehow he decided the best oil and gas opportunity for a young man at that point was Casper, Wyoming. So Dad grabbed Mom, moved her out of Hollywood, L.A. Mom grew up, went to Beverly Hills High School, moved her out. They moved to Casper, Wyoming in 1949. Casper, Wyoming in 1949 was the Wild West. There was still open prostitution, open gambling, but there was a hell of a lot of oil and gas activity out there. And they went out there and started the business. He started off just doing some consulting work, just doing things to earn his keep. And his big opportunity came with one lease. It was called the Waukesha lease. And Dad took this lease, contacted some friends back in California and said, this is a great opportunity. And these guys funded the buying of the lease, and they went out and they drilled it. And the first well that Dad got involved in was maybe one of the best wells he ever drilled. And it was the Waukesha number 1. And that well gave Dad the cash flow. I think he had an eighth of the well, but it gave him the cash flow to go out and pursue other ideas in the energy industry. And Mom and Dad spent 8 years in Casper, Wyoming. They moved from Casper in 1958, 57, and moved to Denver, Colorado. Stayed in Denver from then till 1965. And in 1965, Dad turned to my mother and, says, I feel this energy industry is moving, and everything I see tells me that Houston, Texas is going to be ground zero for the energy industry. And my mother goes like, I don't want to move. I got a great house, whatever. And he goes, well, that's fine, honey. But, I'll always wonder what would happen if I would have moved to Houston. And at that point, Mom goes, I think maybe we should go look at houses. And the rest is history. On a short note, while they were here, it was a little tough moving from Denver to Houston. And they had a hard first 3 or 4 months. And we moved here in June. So they said, well, let's go back. Maybe we need to look at Denver again. And they went back to Denver in December. And it was a blizzard. They were at the Brown Palace Hotel. They were walking down the street. And they looked at each other going, what are we doing here? Let's get back to Houston. And from that point on, we have been truly adopted Texans. So glad to be here.
Well, it made a big mark. It made a big mark on Texas, for moving here in 1965. And your mom, Jacqueline, is still alive, isn't she?
She will turn 103 in 2 weeks.
Wow. And she was the what was she? She was known as the
Queen of Film Noir.
Film Noir.
Film Noir.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Wow. And I've watched a couple of the films. They're great. And just the idea that she packed up, moved to a basement apartment in Casper, Wyoming, as a movie star, and to be the matriarch of what turned out to be a pretty great family. Your dad was kind of a deal junkie. He loved deals, didn't he? Land deals
he loved deals, and I mean, Dad's risk tolerance early on was very high, and he went and did a lot of deals. But one of the things that Dad always, his business was, a lot of it was lease brokering. But what he would do is he would get these leases and he would trade them and sell them, keep an override here, sell something. But his watchword was gold star leases. And what made a gold star lease is if he had something that he thought was worth $25 an acre and somebody called him and said, I'll offer you $100 an acre for it, Dad had put a gold star on it and set it aside and said, I may want to participate in that one. So that was his deal, was he always had the gold star leases. And I will say those gold star leases were very key in the history of our business.
Well, he was also one of the very first people in Texas to play federal lands, coming from Wyoming and Colorado and understanding the federal land system, and coming to Texas that had, little federal, it was kind of out of sight, out of mind. And can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, Dad, because he specialized in federal lands coming out of the Rockies, there is always federal acquired lands that are out there. And what Dad found is there are acquired lands under lakes and rivers that the government has. There's acquired lands under national forests, and there's acquired lands under military bases. And you and I, Alan, one of our first business dealings together was under a military base, and I don't know if we want to diverge into that one, but Alan and I, we shot some seismic over a military base in Flower Bluff outside of Corpus Christi, and very interesting.
I do remember having to, I took all the insignias off all the trucks and just painted an Air Force, a pseudo Air Force insignia on there, so that all the neighbors thought that we were doing something for the government rather than going out and shooting a seismic survey over that, because we had 2 days to shoot the whole thing on a weekend, and that's when they shut down the whole base for the 2 days while we were shooting that thing. That was a pretty wild experience.
Well, I hope it was a naval insignia, because that was a naval air station, not Air Force.
Thank God the neighbors didn't pay too much attention to whatever insignia I had on it.
Oh, that's good. What going back to the beginning of the story and the beginning of Anderson Oil, or at least your dad's beginning of Anderson Oil, that one. What tell me about that well. What is that? What kind of production? What type of well is that? Was it Waukesha number 1? Is that how you said it?
Yeah, it was a Waukesha number 1. It was, I think it was a Dakota well. Okay. Maybe they called it the Muddy, might have been the target formation. It
Muddy,
was, I believe it was in Converse County, Wyoming. And it was truly an amazing story, because Mom and Dad had just had their first baby when the well was there, and they had drilled into the formation, and back then they ran drill stem tests. Well, they opened the drill stem, and without going to the technology, you're trying to see what's down there, and they had a really good blow off the bottom of the bucket, and all of a sudden something started going. So Dad goes, I'm going to go out by the end of the buoy line. I want to catch a sample. And the only thing he had was a baby bottle for my sister Karen. And he went out the buoy line, and all of a sudden oil started flowing out of the drill stem test, and Dad put a sample of that oil in my sister's baby bottle, his firstborn. And, he kept that sample of oil. I think it lasted about 15 years. And somehow I think when we had moved to Denver, it somehow got broken. But that baby bottle, there's actually a picture of my dad in the Casper newspaper standing at the end of that buoy line. I couldn't believe it. We did a little bit of research and found this old newspaper, and it had a picture of Dad at the Blue line with the bottle catching a sample. So it's verified.
Kidding. All right, we're gonna have to hunt that down and put that in this podcast on the edits like that and that well. So what kind of well was that? What kind of IP? What was the?
I couldn't tell you. I will say several hundred barrels a day, and it held on. I do need to get
Muddy or Dakota. Those are good wells.
And it was. I've got to give some. There was a guy named Zach Brinkerhoff, and he owned the rig. And Dad had told Zach about this deal. He says, "Well, I'm in, and I'll drill it." And God bless him, and I want to give him all the credit. Zach goes, if this well hits, I'm just going to net you out of production. And he says, if not, it may take me a while to get you a bill if the well doesn't hit. And that giving, it freed Dad up. He literally, he didn't have a whole lot going for him financially early on, and Zach giving him that break really made a difference. Good people in this business.
Your dad really made and I think a lot of the older guys were this way, but they partnered a lot. They had, you didn't really do deals outside of the people that you did deals with, and I think a lot of the early lessons that I got in the business from you and your dad kind of came from that, that whole, there's no such thing as a good contract with a bad person. And, but your dad had all these partnerships with people all over, from the Mexican border all the way up to, to Rockies, Kentucky, all those places. And what was it about your dad that, everybody wanted to do business with him?
I think one of the things was Dad, by the nature of his business, he exposed himself to so much area. Because when he moved to Casper, he didn't just do Wyoming. I mean, he played federal lands in Utah, North Dakota, South Dakota, Colorado. I mean, he was playing with a big picture. So when you have a footprint like that, you get a lot of exposure. And then he started doing federal lands in Oklahoma under the rivers, and got some federal lands in Kansas, and of course New Mexico had federal lands. And so he started throwing out a very broad blanket. And so by the nature of the beast, you just run into a lot of people. And I want to say that's a gift that Dad had, and then it's a gift he gave to me and to our whole company, because I can say one thing: I was never pigeonholed. I mean, 1 minute I was working on wells in Bakersfield, California, then Jellicoe, Tennessee, then Fort Collins, Colorado. We were all over the place, so I never really, I never became the master of any area, but I had a very broad knowledge of a lot of basins all over the United States. And that was the gift that Dad gave to all of his sons.
And what a great legacy. And you're right. I mean, you have firsthand knowledge on most of these areas. I mean, and you're curious about it, as is your brother Kevin. And so tell me a little bit about what it was like to go to work with Anderson Oil, with a petroleum engineering degree, and working with your brothers.
Okay, so we've often talked about this. My dad, we couldn't quite figure out how he did it, but he had 4 boys and a girl. The girl was the oldest, Karen, and Karen became a school teacher, but she married a CPA, so we'll come back to that. My brother Neil, oldest, rest in peace, he's no longer with us, but he was a landman and then later got his law degree. My brother Craig, our resident Aggie, and he got a geology degree. I ended up being a petroleum engineer at University of Texas. And my brother Kevin, he was so smart he had to get 2 degrees, and he got a degree in geology at U of H and a degree in engineering at University of Texas. So all of us had qualification. I mean, it's not like we were just there because we were, Bruce's boys. Now, that helped. But I'd like to think all of us had the ability to contribute. And it really did. And I don't know how, but by working with your brothers, we have a really unique relationship. And I know a lot of brothers, they have their issues with each other. But one thing I have in all my brothers is total trust. And, when you go to the office and you're in a business like this, you've always got somebody with your back. And if you're out or something's going, somebody's always looking for, looking after to do the right thing. Now, do we have disagreements? Yes, we have regular disagreements. We had some major yelling sessions. But whenever we were done and we voted or came to a conclusion, we usually went out and had a glass of wine or a drink together and just said, okay. Because whenever we did anything, I have never heard us second guess each other very much. Of course, you got to rub it in occasionally, but all in all, I mean, you got to move forward. So you make a decision and move forward.
Yeah, you just perfectly described the business 101. If you like EOS, all the major perfect ways to do business, right? Your perfect leadership team. You just described it, right? You disagree, you argue, then you come to a conclusion, and then that's it. Everybody supports it, and you trust that they will. And that's that you just described that's what every business leadership group, partnership is seeking, is that. And that's pretty amazing that you guys had that. I'm sure a lot of that had to do with your parents, right? I'm sure the way you were raised and the way that you guys saw your dad and your mom, how they raised you, I'm sure had a big impact on how you guys have done that. Again,
I don't know how they did it. I remember being in 5th grade and somebody asked me what I wanted to be, and I said a petroleum engineer. And I assure you, in 5th grade, I had no idea what a petroleum engineer was. But somehow, I don't know if there were recordings under my pillow or what, but and he did it to each of us. And going back, my brother-in-law, Harlan, he ended up CPA, and he ended up working with a business for years. So, all 5 members of the family are part of this business.
And you yourself, as well as your dad, held senior positions in industry organizations. President of YPA of TIPRO. You've been involved in IPAA. You were involved today. It's American Energy. What's the American?
U.S. Oil and Gas Association.
U.S. Oil and Gas Association. So, tell me a little bit about that adoption of leader, taking leadership roles in those kind of organizations, and how important that's been for the family business.
Well, it's not just important for the family business. This is something that, God, I wish everyone in the planet knew, and that is, if you've got a business that supports you, you need to support that business. And I mean, there are just too many people out there who are just happy to go on, let things go on their own. And I mean, look, you can put time or money into your business or into associations. And money is great, but people who put their time into it, we all find out, maybe not recently, but it used to be easier to find the money than the time. Now the time is much harder, and the money's hard to find now too. But I think it's very important to give back to the business that's given to you.
And how do you identify the ones that are the most effective? I mean, where you're going to put your time? There's lots of organizations around, and How do you choose which ones that you're going to participate in?
Wow. I think if you're working in an industry and you run into other people who are working in the industry who are associated with those organizations, then you're naturally going to gravitate to one that has real players in it. I mean, you don't want to go somewhere, the private equity guys, I don't want to cast any stones at them, but one of their problems is it's all about the private equity and return on investment, and that's important. But what happens, the only way you're getting return on that investment is you have to have a business culture that is out there that you can make money in. And a lot of the private equity guys just don't see the importance of taking 2%, 5% of that budget and putting it back to make sure that in Washington, in whatever state you're working in, that you maintain the ability to make a living and to make sure the regulatory and, legislative branches don't put you out of business. Because you just got to look at our business over the last 4 years under the last administration. They literally wanted us out of business, and you've got to give back.
Absolutely. So an example of, I always go back to the example of the family oil businesses always looked at the wells that they drilled. They looked at the production that they made as being nearly permanent assets. It wasn't to drill and flip. And, for instance, there's a fellow out in Artesia, Johnny Mack Petroleum. And his wells, or it's not Johnny Mack, but Mr. Mack, his wells are, people will pay a premium for them because he always used high-grade tubulars. He always used things so that he drilled all those wells as if these were going to be his for the whole life of the well. And we got into a time here, especially when it was kind of build and flip. The whole, as you mentioned, private equity came in, and they did an amazing job at being able to exploit the oil and gas out there. But then that was also a point where there was a lot of corners getting cut because they were trying to get it in as cheaply as possible, without really any thinking of the consequences of what that might mean 5 and 10 or 20 years down the road. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, every well is important that you drill, and you're always hoping. But I will say there are times in our industry where the quality of your equipment is not as good as other times. You two youngsters, y'all, the early 80s were an amazing time. It was, to say there's a boom, you got to remember, we had 5,000 rigs working in like 1982. Well, the quality of every piece of steel, it was, you were just happy to find goods and services. And, it was a crazy time, and as with all crazy times, it went upside down on itself in 1986, and we went in to a very, very difficult time for our industry. So welcome to boom, welcome to bust. It's happened several times since I've been in business.
Well, just in South Texas alone, which everybody considers kind of the guts of a lot of Texas oil and gas, Permian and South Texas, what have you. There was a friend of mine drilled a well in South Texas in which not too long ago he would have had about 6 or 7 options on how to log the well, and in this case the logging unit came down from Oklahoma. So we're becoming a kind of a desert with regards to services in some really important parts of the patch that still have a lot of a lot of conventional still behind pipe, still yet to be found.
Allen, of all things, I was watching 60 Minutes this weekend, and it's painful to watch, but every now and then, and they had a special on the family farmer. And I listened to this guy going like, I am selling my product today for the same price my grandfather sold a bushel of wheat for. And he said, let me tell you, what I'm paying to get that bushel of wheat now is 3 or 4 times more than what and I mean, I thought, that could be any independent oil and gas guy right now who, it's just, it's a very difficult environment to be in right now because, and I mean, it's not just the cost of the pipe or the cost of getting a logging unit. It's the cost of people. God knows insurance. I mean, liability and health insurance for employees is through the roof. This is a tough industry. And, one of the things I will say, the last 5 years have been so difficult for us, but we know one thing: you got to stay in the game. You've just got to be able to stay in there because, eventually the worm's got to turn. And I don't know. I have a feeling. I feel it right now, but I'm not seeing it. But it is. We're a blessed company. We are not huge, but because we're not huge, we have no debt. And when you aren't leveraging yourself, you maybe limit yourself in growth, but you also limit yourself in your exposure to the downside in times like this.
Yeah, I think that was what Warren Buffett made a statement one time. He said, debt's always touted as a growth driver, but in a lot of cases it's like instead of having an airbag in your car, you have daggers. And you hit a bump and all of a sudden you're impaled. And with regards to, this is Anderson Oil, second generation, but the Anderson family, fifth and sixth generation. How's it looking for the next generation?
Well, I am happy to say my son, Scott Jr., otherwise known as Scooter, actually works for the business now. We have, I have a daughter who's an oil and gas attorney. Maybe she'll come work for us someday, maybe not. My brother Kevin has a son who's a petroleum engineer right now, and he may work with us, he may not. Both of them, I'd say, don't come to work here. You can't afford the pay cut. I mean, both of them are doing so well at the companies they're at that, but we're trying to set the stage for there to be a third generation, and that's the hard one to go to. I mean, it's always tough to go to the third generation. We have 5 families. Believe me, the jury's still out, but I think the want and the need to carry on the legacy that my father started is out there, and all the grandkids, except for maybe the last 2, knew my dad. And I think they understand the history and they can see what he wanted to have. So we hope it goes forward. And we've got a good start. We've got another member of the next generation who's with us. So we'll just see where we go. I hope this podcast lasts, and I'll see y'all in 5 years, and I'll let you know how it's going.
Awesome. we us too. Well, hey, what was the transition like? So at some point, you and your brothers took over the business. What was that transition like when you guys took the reins, and what do you do different, if anything, from what your father had done before?
My dad was very blessed. He lived to 82, and Dad was on top of his game. I mean, my dad called me on a Sunday, said, I don't feel very good. We need to go do some stuff. And he had passed away by that Friday. So we had in a very short period of time there, we had to make some adjustments. But the thing is, we'd all been working with Dad for 20 plus years. I mean, we were all there, and we had been doing everything day to day. So, I mean, Dad, he used to Dad liked to get in. As he got older, he would get into the office later, and he would tell my mom, I know he said, like, oh, the boys are doing so well. But he says, I'm still here because I'm here to advise, consult, and most importantly, to warn them of different issues. And, you know, my dad, he did those things. And when he left us, because I had the pleasure of working with him for 20 years, I also, he had so many little sayings and one-liners that, you know, it reminds me of that country western song, I Hear Voices, you know. I mean, I can be doing something and, you know, I can hear Dad going, don't do any deal that if it goes south on you can put you out of business. I mean, the other one, Allen he says, there's no deal worth doing that's worth doing with a bad partner. I mean, just little sayings that pop into your head. And, you know, I told you Dad was not very risk averse in his youth, but as he got older, that's when all debts got paid off. We worked out of cash flow, and that's carried on with us also. And I think it's carried on with all of his kids, not only in the business, but also in their personal lives. That I think we all play it very close to the vest personally, and that's benefited because with all of us, you know, heck, we're all in the same boat together. We all make the exact same salary. I mean, it is a family business, and we're either we make it together or we just don't make it.
Who spec'd that green shag carpet in the first office?
Okay, so
Important question.
I don't know who did the green shag carpet. So when we moved into our offices downtown, at that point it was called the Allied Bank Plaza. And Dad put in green shag carpet, and we moved into that office space in 1980. And we moved out of it in 2000. So we did 20 years there. And when we moved to the office that I'm sitting in right now, 25 years ago, we wanted to put in tan carpeting that you could get stay. And Dad was still alive, and he didn't die till 2001. In 2000, he says, I'll be damned if I'm going to get rid of that green shag. It got me through the 80s and 90s, and I'll be damned if I ever get rid of that green shag carpeting. So I've got to give Dad, I don't know who gets credit for it in the old office, but I assure you Dad gets 100% credit for it, because every girl in the office hates shag carpeting because it's tough if you've got heels or whatever, but we still got it.
Oh, that's great.
So Scott, what is the you know, you've seen the industry evolve and change. What are the things that excite you the most these days? You know, things have changed, and it's real easy to get negative about things. But what are the things that excite you the most?
Technology. I mean, I sit down with my nephew, Matt, Kevin's son, and he starts telling me some of the things he's doing as an engineer. And I mean, he starts talking, I mean, horizontal wells to me were an amazing thing. And I mean, they were a game changer. And yeah, maybe I can delve in that, but just to talk about the technology, I mean, Matt's talking about how they take wells down, they'll drill a formation, and then they'll come up and they'll come back in another formation. So you hear about these U-turn wells. But what you don't hear about is a U-turn well in different horizons. And I mean, I mean, that's just one example of something that it's hard for me to get my mind around it. You know, I remember being so impressed with technology when we got our first fax machine. I said, like, I can send an electric log and somebody can look at it like almost like within an hour of me running the log. I mean, that was just too amazing. And then, you know, then came the digital and, you know, emailing things around. And the technology is amazing in our industry. I have a hard time keeping up with it. You know, I don't want to sound a dinosaur. I'm really trying to absorb it, but there's so much going on. And by the nature of our business, we're not in the middle of some of this cutting technology that's going on. I love to admire it. I love to see it. I love to find ways I can benefit. And the way our company was founded, God bless my dad, is also one of the reasons why we are still a viable operation. That is because we have acreage, we have land. And if there's one thing that is important in the energy industry, you can be the best geologist, best engineer, but if you cannot have land in oily areas that you have rights to, you have nothing. So, I mean, my son, Scooter, he comes in, he's working, he's in our accounting department. He just comes, it's like, we got to get rid of all this stuff in Oklahoma. And I go, we're losing money on all of it. And I go, yes, but you can't get rid of it all because you are in some of the best horizontal drilling country. And one thing, one of those things Dad always told me, he says, like, one thing about Oklahoma, they never run out of horizons. I mean, if it's not the Oswego, it's the Cottage Grove, it's the, you know, Mississippian, it's the Morrow, it's the Skinner. I mean, there's always something new. And I mean,
Cherokee,
now we're in the Anadarko Basin, but it's,
yeah.
He just said, don't ever give up on it because they'll always find a new horizon in Oklahoma. And so, because of the nature of us being strong in acreage, we have been able to survive. I mean, Allen, 10, 15 years ago, we were participating in 60, 70 wells a year. And now we're participating in, with working interest in maybe 5, maybe 10 wells. But what we are is we're getting overrides, we're doing we're doing what we have to do to stay in the game. And we may not be able to afford drilling I think North Dakota's a perfect example. We were approached by Conoco to go drill a horizontal well, and we participated with them. And I mean, that horizontal well was $4 million, and we had like a 5% interest, but we said, let's just, we can do it. And it ended up being a good investment. Well, guess what? Conoco approached us 10 years later, and they proposed 5 wells at $10 million apiece. And at that point, we're going like, I'm out of business here. I cannot play and afford that game. And the one thing you also can't, if you're an operator, you can't go non-consent. I mean, if somebody has a 200% non-consent, by the time they throw all their overhead and everything, you'll never get into those wells. So you've just got to realize you got to know where you are in the food chain as to where you can go. At one point, I could be a carnivore and eat the little things, but now we play it the way that you can afford it, and that's where we are right now.
Well, what's been interesting with regards to that, with all of a sudden the cost of these wells becoming so massive, and the AFEs being so big, what are your thoughts on the whole a new market for AFEs. People coming out there and recognizing that you can't go non-consent, creating a new market for AFEs, and that's something that's pretty.
I mean, it's a great thing. I mean, I hate giving up, selling an AFE, and the AFEs, the way they work them is they basically, let's say you got a well that's a $10 million AFE. Well, they'll pay you maybe a percentage of what the AFE is for that well. And so they may pay you $50,000 to have the opportunity for that well. And I mean, that's fine. It works. It's great. Private equity is all over these AFEs now, because what they've learned is if you buy the AFE, then you've got working interest. So you raise money, and all of a sudden you got the benefits of intangible drilling costs. You're able to buy in, so now you've got working interest, and you didn't have to pay for all the acreage, whatever. You do have the front end cost of buying the AFE, but you get the benefits of the well coming back. The industry finds ways to make things work. So all of a sudden, I can't afford it, but I've got a market out there of people who are wanting to buy these AFEs, and some of them, large private family businesses are doing that. I mean, we aren't large enough to do that, but there are people out there who do it. Like I said, private equity does it.
I was going to say, when Allen said that, I was thinking the same thing. If that would have been now, and obviously, our relationship and your relationship with Clearinghouse, I mean, now if you did want to participate in those, you could go sell that AFE at an auction, and usually those AFEs yield 10 to 30% of the AFE cost. A lot of times they're wellbore only, and a lot of times people will even carve out an override. You have it at an 82, you carve it down to an 80. And so you get a little override, you get some cash, and it's been a pretty good model. I mean, especially with these massive wells coming in, these 10, 15.
I would think with a carved out override, it makes it pretty. I mean, getting some cash up front's nice.
Yeah.
But being able to carve out a little bit of an override on some of these things would be even better. With regards to big massive wells with big massive production.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good market, especially when you're getting AFE on 10 wells, 5 wells. Most people, can't. Most people who have you can't do every one of those deals, right? So at least now there's a good market to do that, and I think that's a good change in our business the last few years, that there is a market for those AFEs, and that you're not held up to Conoco or whoever your operator is, whatever deal they'll make you to not go non-consent, right? Because there's deals to be made there, but having the ability now, and they know that there's plenty of buyers out there for it, I think gives the non-op owner there, that AFE an advantage they didn't have 10 years ago.
Well, you were always under nobody ever wanted to be a non-operated working interest owner underneath a big public company drilling program, because they're going to drill you out.
Right.
And all of us as independents have been in situations where they knew our financial situation and then hit us with, here's our drilling program, this is due in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Or a month, 30 days for, and here's a multi-million-dollar AFE, meant completely to strip you out of the game.
Yep.
And I have friends of mine that had put together deals in the Gulf of Mexico, sold them to majors, and that the majors junked the well. Once they figured out how big the reservoir was, would junk the well and say, we're going to have to re-drill it. Here's your AFE.
Oh, wow.
And just that's happened to people. That was part of the game, was stripping people out. And that's becoming harder and harder to do, which is nice.
Well, the plug for the Clearinghouse, we've gone to many people. We were one of the first ones to go out, one of the first groups to market these and successfully, and really we really put a lot of attention on it the last 5 years. But what we love is we have a bunch of these owners that we had worked with and sold deals for, and And they were just selling typical PDP deals or things, packages that at the time were more the commonplace. And so they told us about these AFEs, and so what we like is they were going non-consent on all these AFEs. So like Scott said, the non-consent's basically you're just giving it away.
Yeah,
you're getting no value for it. So instead of going non-consent, the one group I'm thinking of, they've been able to take. My guess is probably their net of $10 million in AFE, $15 million in AFE, and they made 10 to 30%, have some overrides. I don't know what all the arrangements are, but they've been able to take that and make that a pretty profitable endeavor for them, where they were just going to non-consent. There was no way they could participate. It wasn't in their business model. They weren't a group that participated, and at least at that point. And so that being available, I think, is pretty cool, and I think it does give the small guy an advantage on the big guy, where you have an option where they might be more willing to work with you or give you time or make a deal with you. Whether you do sell the AFE or not, you have more leverage.
And ways of being able to participate in this unconventional play more directly than indirectly. And because, that is once the game became how to go put together massive amounts of acreage for massive amounts of money and spend massive amounts of money drilling wells, that seemed to strip a lot of people out. And one of the things that always concerned me was so much of that acreage that still has conventional resources under it that are untapped, being lost forever from that side.
Yeah, well, I think this is a good dovetail. If you guys are okay with it, I would love. I know you guys know it, but I've heard it over years. When I got the pleasure of meeting Scott, many years ago, and I got to hear this story, and I've heard a piece of it since. I think the natural next place to talk about is how you guys, Scott, was heavily involved, obviously, in investing and being a major part of the early days of Drilling Info.
Yeah. Well, when we first had the idea of Drilling Info, I was working on it, and I went and visited Scott and had lunch and kind of told him we were going to put permits and production on a map and make it available over the internet. And Scott was like, Scott never reacts immediately. He thinks about things, and he thought about it a variety of ways. He was talking about what might be some of the problems of doing that, but then he said, "Yeah, I'd definitely buy that if you could provide that." Which to me was my market research right there. So
the key to it was the map based. I mean, it is one thing to have somebody show you a permit, but if all of a sudden you see a permit and where it's located in a certain county, you go, well, that's my part of the county. Or so all of a sudden you aren't just looking at a piece of paper with a meets and bounds description on it. All of a sudden it's a reality. And like I said, that to me, it was a game changer when you started getting maps and locations and wells all in the same place. It was amazing.
Well, Scott was a member of our board from early days till 2012 when we did our first private equity deal, and we had some pretty fun board meetings back in the day. They at first were kind of honorific type things. They were just having a good time, but then surviving 2008, 2000. When we were kind of growing, it was our board was fundamentally important to us in terms of growing. And we had Craig Taylor out of Midland, Scott out of Houston, and various guys that were independents, and they were true independents, so best sense of the word. And when we would I have to say, when I would tend to get off track, start thinking about what if it was good to have a board that could rope me in a little bit. It was sometimes I bucked a little bit, but it was
well, I always remember the quotes I used were, Alan, keep your eye upon the donut and not upon the hole. I mean, we need to stay focused. And the other part, I remember there was one company who came in and they handled, Alan was wanting to do a merger with this company, and they were taking in all kinds of financial information and joint interest billings. And I said, Alan, we need to stay focused on and do better on what we're doing right now. I said, that you can do that, but until you are absolutely the best and the person who does that one thing, then go on. Well, I can't swear to it, Alan, but I think they actually ended up, afterwards, going with that group. And now Enverus is, they are the godfather of all joint interest billings and accounting within the energy industry.
I do have to say that, that was early days, and my vision for what it could be far exceeded my capacity to actually operate something like that. So, it would have been a disaster had we acquired it if we had acquired it at that point, or if we had merged at that point. It turned out to be great when we acquired it a few years later.
You're ready for it,
when we had far better operational management.
Yeah, how big of an influence on you? I know on me, I my part, but I know on you. How big of an influence during that drilling info early days to successful days was Scott? I mean, how big of an impact on the regular basis did Scott make?
Scott's one of the people in my life that I've always paid close attention to what he said. Mm-hmm. And that and Scott has never been very concerned with my feelings with regards to those things, because he knows who I am. And, he always gave me good advice, and always, has a history of being, like you said, completely honest with his advice. And I don't think Drilling Info could have achieved what it had achieved without him being on the board, to be honest with you, or Craig Taylor, or any of the guys that are in the business.
Yeah, I believe that. I mean, my firsthand experience, similar with Scott helping on the, obviously being an advisory board member of Clearinghouse, and I got to, when we first decided to buy Clearinghouse, the first thing you said is we need Scott Anderson to help us, and I had met Scott, shortly thereafter, and then I figured out why, because what I love about Scott and what I've learned through, every time there's a big decision to make or a big change or something, it's always let's see what Scott thinks. It's never let's figure out the idea together and go do it, or we got it, we'll just go do it. It's let's ask Scott. And what I love about Scott is the two things, right? He tells the truth, and he'll be blunt, and he'll be thinking about the greater good of the business. He doesn't really care about our feelings. He said, hey, here's what's best for the business. Yeah, keep your eye on the donut. Don't do this deal that could make us money, because you need to get this part better first. That kind of advice. But what I also love about Scott more than anybody else is that he's malleable to the truth, right? So if he says don't do something, which we've had this before, and then later on it reveals itself to him that, maybe that was a good decision, or maybe that is something I was wrong about, he'll call you.
He will.
and he'll say, hey, I was wrong about this, Cody. And I just, that part is rare.
That is exactly right. I mean, that was, he saw something that convinced him that maybe he misjudged it at the beginning, or maybe he judged it right at the beginning,
mm-hmm.
but circumstances had changed, and that now there was an opening for it to work. And I definitely believe that's a huge benefit of Scott. I think there's a reason why Scott's on the board of a lot of banks and things like that. I think people recognize board members that really do the work to be a good board member, and Scott was always a fantastic board member for us.
Yeah, for lack of a better way to explain it, the part that is awesome is Scott's the biggest cheerleader when he's on your team. He's the biggest cheerleader you can have, and championing your brand, but also at the same time having that other yin to the yang, where he's your biggest critic when it needs to be. And that's pretty cool to have that. Someone that believes in it. Like he said, all his brothers trust each other. We trust Scott, so we know if he says it, he's thinking about the greater good. And that, by the way, if we're in a foxhole, and when we went through COVID, when you go through, I'm sure when you went through 08, 09, he's the guy that's going to be right there with you, no matter what's going on when bullets are flying. And that is, and that's something that I was so excited to have Scott on the first podcast, because I've been blessed that you introduced me to him, and I've been able to experience that and have that solid person involved in Clearinghouse.
Scott, during COVID, were you able to keep that Mexican restaurant you guys go to every afternoon? Were you able to keep them open on the patio?
It's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because we couldn't go. They wouldn't serve this. So I have a fire pit in my backyard, and the group of guys who we were together, instead, we'd go to my backyard, and all of us would bring a cooler and a little wine, and we'd sit around the fire pit. And instead of meeting at Sylvia's, we would go to the fire pit.
Sylvia's.
And that lasted about 8 months.
And you had the ice for Neil to put into his red wine?
No, it was soda water put into his Pinot Grigio.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. That's it. He loved his spritzers. So we had it. Spritzer. We always had it.
Well, I think that's probably when you said earlier, and when we started talking about how you guys all, fight and get along, all the normal things, you argue, but you guys always trust each other. I was going to pop in there. I was thinking at the time, I think probably a big part of that's your happy hour your happy hours every 4 or 5 days a week with the team probably goes a long way. You guys just spending that time together. That is to me, that's amazing. That's my favorite thing to do. Haven't done it in a while. Is when I go to Houston and go. You guys let me join your Sylvia's happy hour, and I think that's a pretty awesome tradition you guys do.
Well, I told you my brother Neil passed away, and it was kind of Neil's and my deal, but since he died, it's real important to me to keep going back there. And, the table's just not as full when Neil's not there, but always thinking about it.
Neil was a creature of habit, and the places that he would go, it was always fun to walk into one of Neil's hangouts with Neil, because he was Norm before there was a Norm. Hey, Neil.
Yes, he was. He was Norm before Norm was the norm. One of my closing ideas always, and that is, guys, we are in the oil and gas business. And you'll hear me say this any chance I get, but we are some of the luckiest guys on the planet, because we spend our whole life living out every little boy and girl's dream. And that is, we spend our lives searching for buried treasure. And that is what we do. And it's just instead of it being, the map next to the palm trees, in a chest, well, we have contour maps and we have seismic maps, but for all of it, it's just as exciting when you find it as it is when you take that shovel and feel it hit that chest. Well, that's what we have. We have that luxury of being able to do this every day.
The joy of a downlog, as you're sitting there watching it go through there, and you're like looking for that crossover as it's screaming down to the bottom of the hole. You're like,
well, not cross the football. Yes. You want the football.
You want the football. I used to like mudlogs, but I think you were the one that came up. Mudlog giveth, the well log taketh away, or the DST taketh away. Yeah. But there was just the football. Looking for the football on the down log is, and it was funny. Bill Fowler, I had because he was a land guy, and I remember having this conversation with Niblink and Fowler, and I said, what's your favorite part of the business? And and I was like, getting that fresh 3D survey that no one has ever looked at before, and looking for these undrilled structures or interesting stratigraphic things. I said, nobody's ever seen it before, and you're the first to have eyeballs on it. And then Mark was like, I like he goes, I like the downlog. I like looking to see whether my ideas are right on the downlog and something like that. And Bill said, he goes, Bill is the president of Caddo Minerals these days, but Bill goes, my favorite moment is that first net check. And I said, there's a reason why land guys kick our ass all the time.
All the time.
Yeah, when you told your story about your dad, I don't know if I told you mine. My first well was in Casper, Wyoming.
I did not know.
And it was one of these ideas from a good geologist. Great, geologist had some success out there. He was an old timer out in Wyoming, and the trick with these wells is they were drilled with air. So you didn't have the downlog wasn't really a concern. They were drilled with air. So when you drill with air, the idea is if you when you hit your oil, it's going to the pits, right? It's coming out to the pits. So I remember taking this well, and we drilled this well, of course, in December in Wyoming. So it was negative. Staying on location, it was negative however many degrees, and we decided to bring a camper and not have them bring out the trailer. And so the camper's generator went out, so we were freezing. But the whole reason we were there is to go watch the pits. Hey, we're about to be to total depth, and if and when we hit this formation, it is going to spew out oil. Into the pits essentially. And so we went to that. We went there and woke up the next day, and right around a good time of day, around noon, we were at total depth. And I remember the most disappointing, the part where I thought I was never going to drill another oil and gas well or be in oil and gas again, was the point where we watched those pits and there wasn't even a drop of water that came out of it. Nothing, no fluid. We watched those pits sit there for 3 hours waiting for something to come out of that, up to those pits. And it was literally the driest hole you could drill. Because it was there. There was nothing.
So this is a little bit of history. So when you're drilling with air like that, when it's coming out the blue line to the pit, it's dusting. It's a powder. Because you're drilling with straight air. Well, guess what? When it goes there, that is where the term a duster comes from. When you drill one, it's because no liquids came out. All you got is you're blowing dust over the pit.
Drill the duster.
That's what we did. And that was so I started my career that way. I didn't, I went a different direction than your dad. That's why I'm clearinghouse now, and in the PDP is my has been my expertise, because you start like your dad did and drill a big gusher. Your trajectory is a lot different than when you start with a duster.
Well, the first well that I drilled under that I had my name on it alone as a working, rather than a corporate name or something like that, was a Anderson oil well in Tivoli, Texas. And so I get a phone call from Scott, and he goes, "Hey, good news and bad news. What do you want first?" And he said, I said, well, give me the bad news. He goes, I said, well, he said, well, I'll give you the good news. He goes, we found gas, a lot of it. He goes, bad news, blew out, burned down the rig.
Oh, good Lord.
And he goes, and I can't remember whether you signed off on the insurance or not. And I'm like, oh crap. Thankfully, I had.
Oh, yeah.
And thankfully, the insurance carrier was the same insurance carrier for the drilling company, so that there was no finger pointing or anything like that. But boy, it had the news crews from Victoria and Corpus all out there taking pictures. All the snowbirds coming down. We're all sitting there watching it. It was an exciting time.
Yeah, and we call that, that well was on a 40-acre choke.
That's great. Those are the stories that I think, I love. No one gets to hear that. I haven't heard that one. I didn't realize that.
40-acre choke. That's going to be the name of it. That's a name of a book right there.
Well, I may not write it.
Well, Scott, I think we probably could talk for hours and hours, and I'd be open for it. But I think this is a good way to round out the podcast. I think it's obviously, what a great way to start, right? Start with the most important person for me in the clearinghouse. Obviously, Allen and Drilling Info, great friend, great person for all oil and gas folks to be a mentor, of how to do it right and how to build a reputation based on what you built it on, which is doing things right and being loyal to the business and to the people. And so we're very thankful. I'm very thankful to have you on here, and very thankful to consider you a good friend and someone to work, someone that's very important in the business side for Clearinghouse. And so thank you for being on it. Thanks for sharing the stories. I think this is going to be I think this is going to be an awesome podcast. People are going to really want to hear. This is not something this kind of information isn't talked about out there anymore in the business. So I'm excited for people to hear this.
Well, Allen, I don't need to tell you, you're an important part of my life. And Cody, you come in later, but you guys are a very important part of not just business, but as friends. So I feel blessed that we've been able to mix the business and the friendship. And, I find sometimes those are the greatest friendships because it hasn't always been, the easiest of times, but we've always done really well together. So thank y'all both for, first of all, inviting me, and thank you for what you've done for me.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the premiere episode of Crude Awakenings, hosted by Allen Gilmer and Cody Davis. Special thanks once again to Scott Anderson of Anderson Oil for his time and the unfiltered conversation rooted in experience and credibility. More episodes of Crude Awakenings are on the way. Make sure to follow wherever you get your podcasts to not miss an episode. See you next time.